was known when Jared disappeared. I was part of that circle that he counted. I wasn't there for him.
The fact that hundreds and hundreds of people have gone in to national parks and forests, tried to enjoy our public lands, and disappeared or were killed, it's something that the public needs to know about.
This is too much now. This is too much to be coincidence. We're talking about cold, hard evidence.
Jared was wearing some blue sweatpants. He had his shoes on, and he had like a beige color jacket. And what they actually said to me was, "He's okay. We just can't find him."
So that in the nutshell is what the movie is going to be about. And Alan Adadero, the man sitting in the chair there, talking about his son, great guy. And he lost his son on a trail in northern Colorado. And the way that the remnants were found, there are no answers to that. And when his son's remnants were found, the press said at the time, and the sheriff said, "Oh, it's a mountain lion killing." And then he went out and he didn't believe it. He had 4 mountain lion experts look at the evidence and said, "There's no way a mountain lion killed your son." I don't know what killed his son. He doesn't know what killed his son, but it wasn't a mountain lion or a bear. The other case, Dale Stelling from Mesa Verde National Park, we happened to be there with the crew, with the family, when they went into the National Park headquarters at the park. And the National Park Service wouldn't come out to talk to them, wouldn't come out to talk to us. That's a victim's family. They lost him in that park a couple years earlier, and the superintendent at the park and the rangers in the park wouldn't talk to the family. Can you even imagine that in the wildest stretch of your imagination? I wouldn't have believed it unless I was there. The ranger that talked to us, which is the guy said, "I think I made a mistake by even talking to you." His name was Dave. He was a stand-up guy, really, really good guy. And he told us off the record, "Yeah, I don't understand why they're acting like this. This is bizarre." And it's almost as though the direction is coming from a much higher source in the Park Service than just those people. So we'll get going with the PowerPoint here. So coincidence, the word we use when we can't see the levers and the pulleys. In my book, I use that word coincidence a lot, and I don't think it's by accident that it's something that comes up more and more often. What does a coincidence mean to you, and what does it mean to me? A lot of people say, "Well, I don't believe in coincidence because it just happens too frequently." And in my world, it really does happen too frequently. Go ahead, next. So can you make it bigger, the screen, the image? Or maybe even pull it back. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Better for you guys? Okay. So kind of the related elements that I talk about is there's an abnormal number of victims that disappear with disabilities. And I don't mean with disabilities that you would expect people to disappear with. I'm talking about disabilities where this person could hardly walk and they disappeared and they were never found. Bizarre. There's also another area of people with high intellect that also disappear. And I'm talking about, there's a whole series of physicists I've written about that have disappeared, physicians that have disappeared. It's very strange, unexplainable. Canines, a lot of people disappear with dogs. And when the search and rescue people bring bloodhounds to the scene, they can't find a scent. That's not normal. A lot of victims, if they're found near creeks, rivers, and water. There's a geographical clustering effect. There's 58 clusters of missing people in North America, including Canada. That clustering effect means that there's at least 3 people in that region that have disappeared over in a historical time period. A lot of people have disappeared while they've been collecting berries. The most prominent one is huckleberries. And a lot of people are found near swamps or disappear near swamps. If a person goes missing and comes back, they either can't explain what happened, they don't remember what happened, or they physically don't have the ability to talk about it, meaning that they have autism, dementia, something that prohibits them from talking. In Missing 411, The Devil's in the Detail, there's an entire section at the back that describes and gives specific instances of people who have been found in an area that was previously searched. And I'm talking searched maybe 100 times. Or the search and rescue people walk this trail every week, and bam, the victim's found laying on that trail the next morning, almost as though it was placed there to be found. And when the person goes missing or subsequent to the disappearance, bad weather, a change in weather that inhibits search. Go ahead, next. The National Park Service, right at the beginning when I got this information that there were people disappearing in national parks, I said, well, I know a little bit about this because the national park has the National Park Police. And that's they're sworn law enforcement officers who go to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. They're highly trained. There's a big group of them out there. So I know that they have statistics about missing people because the job of a police department is to keep this information on file. You're going to have to turn that phone off, by the way. Yeah, okay, pictures are fine, but no video. The National Park Police have this information, a lot of people believe, and they're not giving it up. Well, under a Freedom of Information Act, I asked for a list of missing people from 183 jurisdictions that they cover, and I asked for the dates associated with those. And the National Park Service says, an attorney called me from them and said, why do you want that information? And I know a little bit about the Freedom of Information Act, and that's an inappropriate question. They can't ask that question if they're going to use it on whether they're going to give you the information or not. And the attorney says, well, we just want to know. I says, I'm doing research. That's all I said. And this was at the very beginning, so they didn't really know who I was. So they said, I said, well, I lived close to Yosemite at the time. I want the list from Yosemite. Let's start with that. A couple weeks later, I get a response that, well, if you want a list from Yosemite, it's going to cost you $34,000. And I says, okay, now I want the list from the whole Park Service. And they said, that's $1.4 million. That ranger right there, Jeff Christensen, disappeared from the Rocky Mountain National Park under very strange circumstances. And I asked for his report. They said it'd be $7,200. 3 months after I asked for that report, it showed up online and they posted it. Go ahead.
Did they ever give you a reason why they want money?
So that's interesting because I asked them why, and they said, because we've made you a commercial requester. I said, what is that? Well, you request things more than the norm, so we classified you as a special classification that you're going to have to pay money. It's a special way to keep me away from the information. Hard to see here, but on the back of my books I have this map. And it's a map of southern Canada and the United States. Those red dots are clusters of missing people. The largest cluster of missing people that fit our profile, Yosemite National Park. There's other clusters that start in Southern California, go all the way up Pacific Coast, up around Idaho, back down through the Rockies. Rocky Mountain National Park has a huge cluster. There's another huge cluster in southern Colorado. Rocky Mountain, southern Colorado. It trails up. It's odd. There's nothing in Nevada. There's nothing down the middle of the U.S. per se. And then it goes up the Appalachian Trail, almost, and then it surrounds the Great Lakes. Anybody ever read a book called The Great Lakes Triangle? So I was given a copy of it years ago, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is weird. We have clusters all the way around the Great Lakes of missing people, and the Great Lakes has this history of airplanes disappearing and boats disappearing, and the Edmund Fitzgerald disappeared. And I mean, the more you read about that area, the more you start to think, wow, this is pretty weird. So take it for what it is, but that's a current version of the latest map. That you won't find online, but that is the most current one of just the first 4 books. Next. This is a map of the latest book, Missing 411, A Sobering Coincidence. As I say, and when I'm interviewed, is that this is another spoke in the wheel that I never would have understood up until just a couple years ago. These are young men, predominantly 98%, young men who have disappeared from an urban setting and are found in water. What's interesting about this, there's a couple cases down here in Southern California, there's 3 in Arizona, there's a couple in Washington, and then the most of them are around the same area of the Great Lakes and shooting up, covering the Atlantic. Boston probably has. Boston and New York have the greatest clusters on the East Coast. But Ontario, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, those are the big numbers there. How this works is that young men, most of them are in college, most of them are tremendous athletes, super smart people. They go out at night, they have a few drinks, their friends say, they were just here a minute ago, they disappear, nobody sees them leave most of the time, nobody sees them leave with anybody, nobody finds tracks, canines can't track them, and all of a sudden, days later, they're found in a lake, pond, river, dead. I would say 35, 40% of the time, the coroners can't determine the cause of death, which is strange. And the other part is they say it's drowning. There's a large percentage of the people that think that the drowning verdict isn't really drowning, but it's there to soothe the community. At one time in Wisconsin, it got so bad in a couple of towns, police chief had a meeting and says, hey, it's just kids drinking a lot of beer and going out and drowning and falling in a river. Community got so upset, almost yelled them right out of the room and didn't believe them. And that's kind of the communities that have had this happen know something weird is going on and don't believe conventional law enforcement. Go ahead. Now, I'm going to start with this case. It's a local case. Mike Herdman was a firefighter, paramedic, Arcadia. He disappeared June 13th. Sespe Wilderness, 55 miles from where we sit right here. Not a long ways away. Go ahead, next. He went with a fellow firefighter, a guy named Taylor Byers. Both these guys, studly guys. And Mike brought his dog Duke with him on the backpacking trip. And they went into a wilderness zone. Now, wilderness means in the United States that you can't drive a car, you can't ride a bike, you can't land a helicopter. Wilderness means you can't get into there unless you're on your feet or you're riding a horse. Next. So, we're right here, right now. He disappeared right here. So, not very far. Next. So, in my last book, Missing 411, Devil's in the Detail, I write about people who have disappeared in proximity to geographical locations that have the name Devil. And I would have never known this writing my first book, but after reviewing, say, 6,000 cases and the profile points I'm looking for, I realize, man, an abnormal number of people are disappearing in the Devil's Gateway, the Devil's River, Devil's Lake. Well, Herdman disappeared right near Devil's Gateway. Go ahead. In the Sespe Wilderness. This happens to be, you can't see it very well here, but this is the area that the gateway was at next. So he disappears June 13th. How it happens is that he's sitting at camp with his buddy, and all of a sudden the dog disappears, just takes off. Herdman's yelling, come back, come back. How do we know that this happened? Because his friend is right there. Herdman takes off chasing his dog. As I told you earlier, an abnormal number of people disappear with their dog. The circumstances of how they disappear, we really don't know because the dog can't talk. Every once in a while, the dog makes it back alive and the people don't, or the people are never found. So Mike takes off chasing the dog. His buddy stays around for a day and a half looking for his friend, thinking he's got to come back. He doesn't come back. So it's almost a half-day long hike out of the wilderness to get help. Ventura County Sheriffs take on the primary SAR responsibility. This is the scene from the trailhead. Go ahead. So he disappears. Ventura County comes in. And there's a search that goes on for days. So they're searching ground, they're searching air. They put up a drone that has FLIR, forward-looking infrared, that'll show a body on the ground. They bring in the canines, and they bring him to the site where his buddy was camping, and they said, okay, he left the campsite chasing his dog. This is an important point, in bare feet. How far could you go in bare feet in a rocky wilderness? That's my question. How far could you go? And if it was me, my dog took off running, I'm sorry, I'd take a few minutes to put my shoes on before I'd take off after the dog. He didn't, he just went. So Mike takes off, they bring canines in, and right away they know something unusual is going on because their canines don't track point to point, which 95 or 99% of all search and rescues track point to point like that. So they're flying helicopters, drones, horse-mounted units. Next. So June 25th, one more before this, I think. I guess not. Next. So this is the only time this has ever happened, and I hope it never happens again because I made a mistake. On June 25th, I'm getting interviewed on the radio by a host named Brian Alvarez. He asked me, because we're talking about this case, it's ongoing, Herdman's gone, and Alvarez goes, so tell me, how is Mike going to be found? I said, well, I shouldn't have said this, but I did. I said, if he's found meeting these points that it appears, this is an exact match to what I'm talking about, he's going to be found on a steep hillside, high above the creek and his campsite, and he's going to have fatal head injuries. And I laid it out. 2 days later, go ahead. 23rd, the dog ends up at the trailhead, and they have his canine. June 27th, Mike's found on a steep hillside, 1,200 feet above where he disappeared, fatal head trauma. Here's the weird point. Ventura County Sheriff Jeff Dean says about the location, it was obviously very difficult hike up very, very difficult terrain.
With no shoes.
No shoes. And the most important point to me is the path that the helicopter took of dropping off search and rescue people flew over that point every day for 10 days. The 10th day, they see Mike's body sitting on the side of the hillside. Good. This is a photo of the area that he was found in. Hey, even in hiking boots, I don't know if I'm going to chase a dog up there. And why would the dog go up that steep of hillside? This is the funeral that they had for him, and his wife and his daughter. Next. Let's remember something. He had no shoes on. They found supposed small amount of drugs in his system. He had been dead, they say, for several days. The helicopter and the drone flew that area for 10 days. There's no way the drone with the FLIR would have missed this. Canines, no scent. Found an area, 1,200 feet. So he was 2,200 feet at least above where he disappeared when he supposedly fell, because the cliff above where he was found was another 1,200 feet above that. So you follow?
Yeah.
And again, the area is searched for 10 days, and he's found in an area near Devil's Gate. Go ahead. Now, that was Herdman's case. And I think forever I'm going to think that was a direct match to what I'm talking about. Go ahead.
Did you ever find out what condition his feet were in when they found him?
That's the question I'm always concerned about, and I never get it. They won't address it. His feet should have been torn up horrifically.
That gives you the answer, though, doesn't it?
Oh, it sure does. It sure does.
Didn't they also say that he was found underneath some brush?
They said there was some brush in the area but it was partially covering the body. Obviously, it was partially because the helicopter saw him.
Right.
So the FLIR should have picked him up.
What type of drugs did they find in his body?
They found a small amount of THC and another small amount of drugs that the coroner said wouldn't contribute to the death.
About the weather, was there like a weather event afterward, like in other cases?
I looked for that, and I couldn't find any specific weather that inhibited that. No, because people think I'm psychic or something. I'm not psychic. It was just, you read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reports, and the facts leading up to this, I would have looked like a fool if I was wrong, so I'll never do that again, but I just happened to be right, and I felt bad because for his family.
I told my husband the same thing, and he never, when it happened, I said the same thing, and he would not address that I could say that.
These cases, 2 current ones this last summer, both of them, to me, those 2 guys could be brothers almost. And Joe Keller, 19, missing July 23rd this last summer, 4:30 in the afternoon, Cornelius County, far, far southern central Colorado. He went to a dude ranch that was owned by his aunt. And he was driving cross country with a few friends, and he was meeting his parents at the ranch for a week just to get together on a family event. Joe gets there with his buddies. They say hello. Every day in the late afternoon, he and his buddy, wherever they're at, they go running. Joe was a stud athlete. He was a swim instructor, and he was a man amongst men as far as athletic build and physical ability. His buddy says, hey, let's go down, we'll run the road around the ranch. And they said, okay, and they take off running. Halfway through the run, his buddy says, I hear him behind me. And then he goes a little further on, I don't hear him anymore. And I looked and he wasn't there. So I just finished the run, came back. I thought maybe he left early. Huge search, lasts for weeks. There's no, and I know that a lot of this stuff isn't going to be publicly available, but Neil, his dad, called me through Facebook somehow. They heard about me, and I talked to his dad for a long time. There was no scent trail. He said from the point where his friend last saw him, they brought the dog all the way around the road, and it never left the road. There was no scent trail leaving the road. This is an isolated dirt road in the middle of nowhere, southern Colorado, private ranch road. There couldn't have been a car on the road per se because the ranch controls who goes on the road. His buddy would have heard a car. So he disappears, no scent, never found. Killed his dad. The man is destroyed. On the website, I talk about the relationship between search and rescue and local authorities and parents and relatives, and the way that family was treated by that Cornelius County is deplorable. There's an article out there that writes about his dad going in front of the Board of Supervisors for Cornelius County. It's deplorable. I don't understand how anybody could be treated like that, and it was bad. Second case, Morgan Heimer, 22, less than 8-9 days later, disappears. He's a University of Wyoming student, and he's a river guide on a commercial float trip down the Colorado River. Another stud guy, knew the job like the back of his hand. He was one of the leaders on the float trip. They stop at a place on the Colorado River where a small creek, I'm talking small creek, the water comes up to below your knees. Where the creek comes into this area, they stop the float trip, and every time they take the people and they walk up the creek to this area where there's a waterfall that comes into the creek, and they let the people take pictures, and they stand under the waterfall, that kind of thing. Well, Morgan's one of the guides that take the people up there. Everyone's wearing life preservers, and he is the last person in line as they're coming back to their float. Somewhere along that short trip, it's not long, he disappears. Huge search, never found. And in the words of some of one of the other guides on this trip contacted me through Facebook, and then we had an email exchange, and he said, nobody on our company can understand where he went because there's no place to go. Huge walls up this creek, the water's super shallow, there's no place to go. Next. This is Missing 411, North America and Beyond. And this was the third book in the series. And you can't see this, but it says, don't ever be last in line. And I talk about the number of cases where the person is last in line. Keller and Heimer were last in line. So the weird thing is, so that's Joe Keller disappeared in southern Colorado on the left. It's kind of the way that Morgan disappeared on the right. Conflicting areas, definitely, but the consistent element was both young, both athletic, both blonde hair, both the last in line, both never found, both no scent trail. Next. It's a case that bothers me a lot. And we actually made a real short video about it. And you go to YouTube, go to Can-Am Missing, you can watch what we did with it. But Jim McGrogan, an emergency room physician from Indiana, he went to Vail, Spraddle Creek Trail, with some other physician buddies of his. And what they were going to do is in the middle of winter, they were going to take this trail, and I'm talking, there's probably 20 people a day that take this trail every day of the week. You can't miss the trail. It's huge. And they're going to go to this one hut, and they're going to Iceman hut, and they're going to spend the night. Well, he's traveling with the three friends. Well, not only is McGrogan a brilliant physician, but he's also a super stud athlete, marathon runner, in exceptional shape. And in fact, in one of my other books, I talk about runners and the number of runners who have disappeared over the years. McGrogan, his buddies say, hey, we got to rest. We're at 10,000 feet. McGrogan says, hey, I'm ready to go. I'm going to go up and I'll meet you at our next stop. So he takes off ahead of the group. First in line, last in line. First in line, last in line. He's carrying a split snowboard on his back. He's got an avalanche probe. He's got a personal locator beacon. He's got shovel tent. He's got food for 4 days. He's got a cell phone with a backup battery. The guy has everything you need to survive under the harshest of conditions. He had a tent. Next. So 8 a.m. they started the hike. 10 a.m. the group rested. McGrogan takes off. Next stop, McGrogan's not there. They said, well, he's an athlete. He probably just went straight to the hut. So they went all the way up to the hut. He's not there. One of his physician's friends said, okay, we got to go back, notify search and rescue. So one of the guys went all the way back. Search and rescue started. They put a helicopter on it. They put bloodhounds on it. Every trail leaving that main Spraddle Creek Trail was searched out by search and rescue. Every one. Bad weather came in a couple days after the search started and shut everything down. Next. So, it's hard to see on this map, but he disappears on the Spraddle Creek Trail. This is the biggest road through the middle of the mountains in Colorado. This is 70. Vail Ski Resort's right here. The trail starts right off the freeway, cuts up Iceman Hut. This is another trail that we took that takes you up to some falls. Next. So 5 days they search for McGrogan, they don't find him. And the point from trail to trail where he disappeared is nothing but rolly kind of mountains without a lot of ground cover. Sometimes there's 20, 30 feet of snow and drifts in that area. It's somebody traveling that area point to point. They look like a snow plow from a helicopter. Easily seen. They don't see anything. There's nothing. And 20 days after his disappearance, 4.5 air miles, which is probably more like 10, 12 miles the way you'd have to hike, he's found on this other area on this other trail. So his GPS worked because they recovered it. His cell phone worked and had an extra battery. He still had his tent, his shovel, and his warm clothing in his backpack. When they found him, he did not have a coat on. He was wearing gloves when he disappeared. He wasn't wearing gloves when found. He didn't have his boots on when he was found. They never found his boots. And he had a fractured skull and a broken femur. He was wearing a helmet, and his helmet was destroyed. Next. 20, 30-foot drifts, no trails point to point. His GPS worked. Tent never was used in his backpack. Majority of the time where he would have had to have traveled to get point to point, he could actually see Vail. And 70% of the time during that route, his cell phone would have worked. Safety in his instance was obviously downhill. Boots, where are they? Go ahead. Go back. So, on this instance, in the video, we actually went to the location where he rented the split ski and his emergency equipment. And we showed the company and their experts where he went. You guys go, well, we never knew that. Because the coroner came to us and gave us the equipment back, but they never told us that. I said, did they tell you that he was found wearing no boots? They go, what do you mean no boots? No, he was found with no boots and they never found his boots. No, they never told us that either. I go, does any of this make any sense? The location where he was found, where he just, they go, no, we've hiked that area. We know that area well. There's no way anybody would have done that. Why do you mean? He goes, because that's a near impossible task to go point to point there. Huh. So all of the articles about McGrogan, not one article will say anything about what I just told you. None. Yeah.
Did you say that he had GPS that showed where he went?
No.
Okay.
Everything was off.
Okay.
So this case is a real unusual case, but it hits on a lot of the points I talk about. The other profile point I didn't bring up a lot was when people are found, they're usually found missing clothing or missing shoes. Shoes are a big point in all of this. Next. This case, a bizarre case. This woman, Karen Sykes, knew Mount Rainier National Park like the back of her hand. She wrote articles for magazines and for online media about the trails in Mount Rainier. She was considered like the doctor of the trails. She's hiking with a friend. They go up a trail and they reach some snow on the trail, and the friend says, hey, I'm just going to take a rest. She goes, hey, I'm just going to go up the trail a little bit. I'll be right back. She disappears. Friend goes back, notifies search and rescue. Go ahead, next. Anyhow, they notify search and rescue. There's a multi-day search. She's found over the top of a mountain range, a small one inside the park, and in a gully, a boulder gully on the other side, dead. Wow. And they said hypothermia. You can go back and read about Karen Sykes, and the people will say she's the last person in the world that would have gotten lost there.
Was it really far?
What's that?
Was it really far from where?
It's over an entire mountain range. It was long. I mean, especially during the winter months, you're not going to do that in boots. And it was just lucky that they stumbled onto her. Cody Matthews, anyhow, he was another one, disappeared outside of Lake Tahoe, was staying at his family's place, told the family, hey, they weren't there, they were going to come up the next day. He told his family, hey, I'm going to be here, I'm just going to take a short hike, I'll be back, in a couple hours. He disappeared, bring canines in, they can't track his scent. He completely disappeared off of everyone's radar, never was found. He was a UC Berkeley student, super smart guy. Next. Common denominator on all of these, any ideas?
Medical?
All physicians. Yeah. Talika Patrick, start with this one right here in the top left. She was a physician, disappeared in Indiana off a freeway. Her car was pulled off a freeway. Huge search, FBI, right on the other side of the freeway, there's a small lake. They searched the lake for 3 days, they didn't find anything. 7 days later, the body's in the lake. McGrogan we talked about. This girl here, Bagnall, was hiking with an attaché friend of hers in British Columbia. One of those rare times, very rare, 2 people disappear at the same time, both never found. They never found a campsite, they never found anything. Cover one more here. These two right here, daughter and her dad. Her dad, ER physician from Boulder. They were hiking what's called Mount Missouri, a 14er in Colorado. Somehow or another, they disappeared. helicopter flights for 5 days going in and out, dropping people onto Mount Missouri to come down and search the mountain. The 5th day flying the same track, helicopter sees 2 bodies below. They flew it every day for 5 days. The 5th day, there are the bodies. The sheriff said at the time he does not understand how they fell. Pretty big trail going to the top of that mountain. Not a lot of place to fall. There was no obvious area to fall from. Both died of serious head injuries. It's bizarre. Now, the weather at the time, he was a smart guy. He picked the perfect day to hike. No wind, perfect weather, clear skies. Again, bizarre. Next. Go ahead, next. Now we talked about McGrogan. Next. That was McConnell and Robert Von Gortler, the 2 that came off Mount Missouri. Go ahead. Common denominator on all these cases: Trenny Gibson, Stacey Harris, Teresa Bear. All of these women disappeared in a national park or forest and were never found. And Stacey Harris's case, right here, Yosemite National Park, she disappeared from a town right next to where I grew up. 14, she went with her dad into the backcountry of Yosemite. They took a horseback trip back into some cabins. And they get there, she changes, and she goes, "Dad, I'm going to go out here to this point right here, and I'm just going to take some pictures with my camera." And there's some 72-year-old guy who's already sitting on the rock that was with their trip. So she walks out there. Everybody sees her walk out there, and she's taking pictures. They couldn't hear what she said, but she told the 72-year-old guy, "Hey, there's a lake down here a couple hundred yards down this granite rocky area. I'm going to go down that lake. I'll be right back." Everybody sees the guy sit there. She walks down, goes out of sight. A couple hours later, she's not back. So they go down, they look, they can't find her. Ends up being a huge search. The only thing they found was a lens cap to her camera right when she entered the tree line around this lake. Huge search, never found. Now, the interesting part to that story is this is a case I knew about from a long time ago, and it was one of the first cases I went after with the National Park Service. I name a date, time, location, and her name, and I made a Freedom of Information Act request for that report. Freedom of Information Act says that we have a right as citizens of the U.S. to documents that our government has. If you're not going to compromise some kind of investigation. Stacey Harris' case had been classified as a missing person case. No suspects, no follow-up for 15 years. Nobody probably touched the case for 15 years. I get a call, National Park Service, from a special agent. Last name is Yu. Why Yu? Special agents are part of the detectives for the National Park Service police. He asked me why I want that case. I go, "That's weird." I go, "The National Park Service is giving me a lot of cases where I name a date, time, location, and a name." I says, "Why are you even asking? I mean, it's just a missing person case. It's over 25 years old." They said, "We want to know why you want it." I says, "Well, I'm just into missing people, and I want it." And he says, "Well, I'll quote him. Special Agent Yu said, 'I will never see that case. Ever. To this day, I've never seen that case.'" I said, "Is it a criminal case?" "No. It's a missing persons case." "Is there follow-up to be done on it?" "No." "Has anyone touched that file in years?" "Yeah, probably 12 years. Nobody's even looked at it." "Why won't you give it to me?" "I'm just saying you're never going to see that case file." Never have seen it. Her mom died. Her dad's dead. Her older sisters died. I don't know why. But Thelma and Trenny disappeared in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. These are all cases that most people have just forgotten about. Next. Common denominator here, these are all long-distance runners. Victor Tenney was a world-famous long-distance triathlete from the Canary Islands, disappeared by running a big mountain. Mika True, world-famous trail runner, he disappeared and was found laying in a creek. Jeffrey Boucher, a teacher from Ontario, every morning, rain or shine, he would get up and he would run. It could be 20 below. That guy would get up at 5 in the morning and go running. One morning, he just disappears. Huge search. Weeks and weeks later, he rolls up on a beach off of Lake Ontario in a frozen ball. Even though the lake's not frozen, he's frozen, and nobody can understand that. Jonathan Audet disappeared not too far from here in a place called the Devil's Punch Bowl, LA County Sheriff. And every day he went running. They've never found him. Magdalena Jankowski disappeared in Northern California, right near the Pacific Ocean. 2 women near her age disappeared at the same time and were both found deceased on a hillside outside this park. Jarek was a commodities broker in New Jersey, disappeared, was found in the Hudson River. Strange. Lemater, Seaward, Alaska, he was running something called the Mountain Marathon race up this hillside, very steep. He made it to the top. Guy goes, "Hey, you're the last guy here." He goes, "I'm okay, I can make it down." So the monitor said, okay, and he went down. Lemaitre has never been found. Go ahead, next. Go ahead, next. That's the area that Audet disappeared. That's Seaward, Alaska, next. That's a picture of Lemaitre coming up the mountain, the last picture ever taken of him. Next. Mika True, world famous trail runner. And they say he died from cardiomyopathy, and nobody believed it. Next. Victor Tenney, running on the Canary Islands. That's the mountain he disappeared on. The problem is, just like many of these places where these people disappear on high mountains, there's no cover on it. Your body would stick out. A canine would smell you decomposing. Next. Part of the search, it was a world international search. That was him and the Iron Man in the bottom middle. There's the mountain in the background. Not a lot of places to go. Next. So another big athlete, a math professor, was training in Hawaii, disappeared. It was found at the bottom of a cliff. There's a lot of these things where head injury, dropped. McGrogan, dropped, head injury, dropped, head injury. Next.
Question on the head injuries.
Yeah.
Any contusions other than the initial is just the head only? Or?
Sometimes it's the head only. McGrogan had a broken bone in his leg too, but the cause of death is always head trauma.
Consistent with a fall or more consistent with a beating? They don't tell you.
Would there be distinct differences between the head trauma, the type of head trauma?
You know what? There's a couple of medical examiners that are friends. I always send the report to them and ask them for an interpretation. And they usually come back and say, well, that's really weird.
Excuse me, do you think it's soul harvesting? I was thinking the same thing.
What is that?
There's, well, you go ahead. I have studied all the religions and everything, and there's one that claims that there is soul harvesting, and that they also drop souls in ice balls on the planet. So it could be a type of soul harvesting.
So kind of what I tell people is I don't discount anything, but I live in the world of facts. That's why people read the books, because I don't make any theories. I don't give theories that I can't support or ideas that I can't prove.
You got a body in an ice ball where there was no ice.
I live in this world of facts.
So something, they were dropped.
I don't think Tenney was dropped. Tenney was gone. I don't think Boucher was dropped. I think he was in the lake. I don't know how he survived, how his body was in ice in the lake. I don't understand that. I talked about Jarzik. Next. So here's the part with Jarzik. Ran every night, was running along the river, and people say, well, he just fell in. I'm sorry. I mean, I run every day too. I'm just not going to fall in a river. especially when there's a big paved trail there and a big fence. And I'm sorry, but if I fall in the river, I could swim. Next. Talked about her, go next. That's the second woman in 2 weeks, same location. What's interesting about Mount Tamalpais is I also wrote about 2 women, again, that disappeared at Point Reyes National Park, just over the mountain from where these 2 disappeared. Next. Common denominator here, except for Miss Wallace, all of these women have never been found. She was found in a wilderness zone where she shouldn't have been and her body shouldn't have been. But all the rest of these disappeared, were never found. And when I talk about Michelle Vanek, when she disappeared, she was on the same kind of mountain that Tenny was on, where there's not a lot of ground cover. It's a bare mountain. It's a 14er. She was near the summit. She vanished.
Is there a variety of occupations?
Oh, yeah. There's certain occupations more than others, but there's a variety. Next.
And mostly smart.
There's both ends of that intellectual spectrum. And there's some in between. But there's an abnormal number that have some sort of dementia, Alzheimer's, other kinds of disabilities, and then there's brilliant people on the other end. Common denominator here, none of these boys have ever been found. So, Dennis Martin, another one from Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Dennis Johnson, Yellowstone National Park. He and his sister disappeared simultaneously. His sister wanders back like 5 hours later. He was never found. Chris Vigil, Northern Colorado. Vigil and Alfred Beelarts. These 2 right here make up 2 points of a 3-boy triangle in northern Colorado that have disappeared. The other boy, Adadero's body was found. His body was never found. His body was never found. Chris Harvey, southern Colorado, took his dog for a walk from their cabin way out in the middle of the wilderness, never came home. Borden Kircher, North Lake Tahoe, his parents went to their cabin, and he was a little boy. He jumped on the swing and was swinging as everybody unloaded stuff into the car. They came out, the swing is still swinging. He's gone. Never found. There's some wild theories on that. People said, oh, he wandered down 1.5 miles down this hillside and fell into Lake Tahoe. That's completely bull. Yeah. And Edward Nye, Crater Lake, he's one of 3 boys, 1, 2, 3, right around Crater Lake that disappeared. Douglas Lake, Newcomb, New York. Interesting, these 2 cases right here, of all the cases in the United States, the only 2 I've ever found where the Green Berets were called to search for them. And they both weren't found. There's pictures of the Green Berets arriving in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. I talked to the head tracker for the Park Service at the time, who's now retired, and he said, Dave, they set up a camp away from everybody with their own communications. We offered to team with them and search the park since we knew the park, and they said, no, we search alone. Twice I filed Freedom of Information Act requests against the Army for the orders and the paperwork that went with that search. It's not that I never got the paperwork and they denied me. They wouldn't even acknowledge the Freedom of Information Act request twice. So, very strange. Next.
I got a question.
Yo.
The boy with the sister who came back 5 hours later.
Dennis Johnson.
Did she have comments to what happened?
No, I was lost. But that's the only time where brother and sister have ever gone missing simultaneously. See, she disappeared first. And then his dad said, hey, go look for your sister. Then he disappeared. It's very strange.
Was your sister scared?
I don't know. It doesn't say if they're scared or not in the reports, otherwise I'd say so, but... Impossible journeys. Charles McCullough goes into Crater Lake National Park, up the same road everyone goes to right to the lake. 29th, 75, 20, 30-foot drifts of snow around that lake at the time. If anyone's ever been to Crater Lake, if you've never been there, you got to go there before you die. It's a beautiful place. and they get a lot of snow up there. He goes up there by himself because he wanted to take a year off between high school and college and tour the national parks. They have him, people validate, he's in the park, he's next to the lake, he's seen taking pictures. A couple days later, he doesn't report back to his parents who live in Virginia. His dad says, well, let's start a search. Yeah, well, we're not sure where he's at. National Park Service only start the search when the dad comes out there and starts raising heck. They search for him for 10 days. They don't find anything. They don't have any tracks in the snow leaving that area, so they say, he probably got to ride out. That's what their thoughts were. So he's found October 76, and how he's found it, this is a fascinating story. Before his dad leaves, he gives the Park Service a list of items that he knows that Chuck's going to have in his backpack that people saw him wearing when he came in. One was this strange-looking VW key and some other items. So summers later, people are 12 miles into the wilderness, hiking off trail in the park, and they come into this box canyon with this giant Douglas fir tree laying across this small creek again. They step onto the Douglas fir tree and they look down and they see a top of a skull and little tiny bones everywhere. They go, oh my gosh, something's wrong. They hike back out and notify the Park Service. I say this is a 1,000,000 to 1 shot. In the report I got from the Park Service, it lists the name of the ranger, which it usually doesn't. I look him up, and I just drove to his house in Oregon. Sometimes, to hit a home run, you got to step up to the plate. And I'm not kidding you. The man could not have been a nicer man. His name was Marion. He's since died. He and his wife invited me in. What can we do for you? And I named them a color case, and he kind of stands up and goes, oh my God, 30 years being a national park ranger, you're talking about the one case that bothered me the most in my life. And he said that he and his partner got the report from these campers. They ride on horseback into the scene. He goes, Dave, I went in there, and right away I knew something was really, really wrong. Because a little further down, when you step up to this log, what you see is a pair of socks. And if I took my jeans off and I dropped them right down to my socks with my underwear, that's what Marion said he saw. Except it had been a couple of winters and the underwear had evaporated away except for the elastic strap. Jeans were intact. Buckle was undone. Zipper was down. Broken right tibia. That's your shin bone in your right leg. And there were little bones in the socks. So, we know that no animal can unbutton your pants, put your zipper down, and if an animal had attacked him, the ongoing theory would be his pants would have been torn to shreds. They would have gone after the flesh and the feet. None of that was disturbed. They never found his shirt, his coat, his boots. And Marion said in 30 years, he goes, you always find the boots because the boots don't evaporate away. They are around forever. And he goes, when we saw this site, we knew something was really, really, really wrong. Those were his words. And we pulled back and we went into headquarters and we called for an evidence response team from the FBI, which has primary jurisdiction for complex cases. And he goes, Dave, we didn't know what happened, but that wasn't normal. And the FBI flew a team down from Portland and worked the scene. So, being the smart investigator I am, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request against the FBI for McCullers' report. And what do I get? I get a piece of paper that's 80% blacked out. Why would they do that on a missing person case? Tell me why. I don't know. Next. Now, this case, David Allen Scott. I talk about young people that disappear and are found in places that if you're a parent, you know your little 2-year-old is not going to go to because they can't do it. David Allen Scott disappears in this place called Mono Village on the east side of the Sierras, a place called Twin Lakes. And his parents are this is the lake here, you can barely see it, but they're camping down here at the bottom. And his dad says, they got a trailer, and his dad says, yeah, you see him over by the tree line 1 second. I go in the trailer, I come back out a couple minutes, he's not there. I start looking around. So as you're at this location, you're looking up, and you're in a bowl of huge mountains, granite-covered huge mountains. And you can see that they almost go straight up. And up the side of one of these is this switchback trail that goes all the way to the top of this one mountain, down the other side and up the other end. So they bring in, there's a huge, huge search effort. They bring in a mountain group from the Army because they're at such high altitude and they train near there. They make this search and they bring in a dog, and a dog starts going up the switchback. And they go, that's bizarre, because they're seeing the dog going up the switchback because you could see it right from the bottom where he disappeared. I mean, it's wide open. And then they go halfway up. It gets late in the afternoon. The dog comes back down. The next day, they said, hey, let's just send a team up there for the heck of it. So they send a couple of Army guys up, and up the mountain, down the other side, partially up the other side in a boulder field, they find David Scott's body naked except for a pair of diapers. And the claim was he climbed 3,000 feet up, down, and up the other side. Believable? How did he get there? Next.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you ever have remote viewers look at your cases?
We've tried. They have not had success. Next.
There is not.
Oops. What's that?
Oh, the guy disappeared.
Oh, where'd he go? This is our micro. This is.
I work for Microsoft.
Yeah, Mike works for Microsoft, so something fails. This is the side of the mountain that Scott had to have gone up, but that's kind of the view from up above. Up this side, down, and then up, partially up that mountain too. Next. Garrett Bardsley, northeastern Utah, disappeared on a Boy Scout outing with his dad. They're out, and the scout camp is between this lake. You okay? Dad and Garrett wake up, and they walk through this little clump of trees, barren trail. They're high up in elevation. They go and they're fishing on this lake. Fishing for a while. Garrett steps in the water, gets his sock and his shoes wet, takes his shoes off, says, hey, Dad, I'm going to go back to camp, get some dry socks. His dad can see from where he walks on this trail into this clump of trees, and then the Boy Scout camp is right there. He never made it back to the Boy Scout camp. He disappears. Huge search. They found a sock of his, I think 1,000 feet up into the mountains. This is how thorough the search was, in amongst boulders. They found his sock. That's amazing. They never found him. Next. Jill Hatch, right where Herdman disappeared, if you went another 8 miles back into the wilderness, she disappeared in '58 at a place called Camp Shidek. Anyone ever been there? Really remote place. There's this little bar that's kind of cool, actually, in the middle of nowhere. And I was talking to them about it, and they said, well, we remember this, one of the owners. She goes out and she goes fishing with her dad, and her dad loses track of her. She's found 3,500 feet up the side of a mountain in the middle of a snowstorm, deceased on the side of the mountain, when safety is down low, and obviously her dad isn't up there. The fishing's down there. How did she get up there? Nobody knows. And she left her dad with her dog. So next.
Did the dog come back?
Yes. Keith Parkins, Northern Oregon. I actually met this man a few months ago. He's still alive. Disappeared 4/10/52, Ritter, Oregon. This is in the middle of Noplaceville, Eastern Oregon. There's nothing out there. And he disappears. His parents went to go visit some relatives in the middle of this wilderness area. It's spattered with trees. There's not a lot of thick trees. He's on one side of a barn. His mom calls he and his brothers for dinner. His brothers run one way around the barn. He says he goes the other way around the barn, disappears. He's found 19 hours later, between 12 and 15 miles from where he disappeared, over 2 mountains, 2 creeks, and he's found face down in an ice pond. And he lives. So they said they were going to give me another 15 minutes because we started 20 minutes late.
Okay, so we will need to clear the room immediately.
Hey, you guys, don't leave.
Don't want to surround you, that's questions.
So do I get another 20 minutes? Everyone who wants another 20 minutes, raise your hand. Yeah, okay, it's about.
Everyone agrees it's the room wasn't set up.
It wasn't.
Set up the room on time.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that he was still, that you talked to him.
I met him.
Okay. Was there a personality change or anything mentally different about him
So
afterwards?
here's the amazing thing. We went to his mom's house in Walla Walla, Washington. You can't make this stuff up. They knew we were coming. They were going to meet us. And his mom presented us with the original clothes and shoes he was wearing when he vanished. She's 92. She goes, I'll never forget this the day I die. She was super, super smart lady. And Keith says, hey, I don't have any memory of it, you know. But the mom says, oh no, his dad was 100% sure he was at least 12 miles, probably 15 miles from where he disappeared. My problem with it isn't that he didn't travel that distance, but there's no way in the world that a parent would believe their kid could go that distance in 19 hours. Which means, why was the dad that far out searching?
So was he tracking him then?
So that's an interesting part. Part of that story and part of the evidence was he was tracked going 2 miles this way, they say. And then he turned and went 12 to 14 miles, or 13 miles that way. And they lost him when the track stopped over here. It makes no sense why you'd make a U-turn because he had to go by almost the ranch.
Do we know what his occupation was?
That's a kid.
He was 2 years old.
I don't know that.
The dad? I don't remember.
But he had dogs? He had search dogs?
No.
How did they track him? Who tracked him?
The dad.
How did he track him then?
Footsteps in the snow. Next. Durango, Colorado. A girl 20 months old is found after she disappears from her backyard in a rural area. The part about this is bizarre. She's found on the top of a peak 5 miles away. And there's almost like a desert area between her house and this peak. And even the sheriff said at the time, she had to have been kidnapped. Now, you're a kidnapper. Are you going to take this 20-month-old child and drive her and leave her at the top of a peak?
Was there a road?
Some old lumber road. But there were searchers everywhere for 5 days. They find her in that first 20 hours, there's searchers like everywhere. So if you got the child, are you going to go dump her on the peak when there's searchers everywhere? No, you're going to dump her easiest place. Probably drive 20 miles on a road in the middle of Colorado and dump her on the side of the road. You're not going to go to the top of a peak.
What was the circumstances behind the abduction or the
Playing in her backyard, disappeared.
Okay.
Next. So world famous photo. Louis Dunton, 3 years old, disappears in 1947 from Fitzwilliam, New Hampshire. He's found at 2 a.m. the next day. So he's gone for about 8 hours. And he's missing all of his clothes. All of them. And his mom gets him back and he goes, who took the clothes off? The searcher said, no, that's... And there was a photographer with this dog when they stumbled across him in the middle of the woods. This is the one case where a dog that I've written about had found anybody. But the reason it's here is the mom said, my boy can't take his clothes off. He's too young. Can't take them off. Who took them off? They said, no. We have a picture of the moment we found him. His feet are buried in leaves, and that's the exact way he looked when he was found. Next. This is a graph that's in the back of one of my books that talks about the length that young people were found from the point where they were last seen. Just to prove to you, this isn't an isolated incident. It's happened a lot. Next. Another one, this is, and rather than distance traveled, meaning miles from point to point, elevation that the people were found at and their age. Most search and rescue books are not going to say a 2-year-old is going to be found 3,500 feet above where they disappeared. You won't find that anywhere. And you won't find any search and rescue books that want to even address it. They just ignore it. Next.
Dave,
Yo.
is there, just listening, it sounds like there's a lot of winter or cold weather finds or disappearances. Is there an equal number in warmer or milder climates?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. These two women, the one on the right, a physician, the one on the left, retired teacher. They're in the later stages, having a great life, traveling around the country. They go to Craters of the Moon National Monument. Anyone ever been there? Roughest terrain you will ever see in your life. And I'm talking rough. And there are these trails that go in amongst the park. These two women parked their truck. They got their dogs in the truck. Family said there's no way they're going to walk away from those dogs for more than an hour. No way. They disappeared for days. And what happened was, next. It's what the landscape looks like. Super sharp, moonscape kind of rock. They disappear, and they're found like weeks later. One's found within a week. The other one's found, I think, 2 weeks later in the middle of this. And the family says there's no way they're going to leave the trail. But they're found in the middle of it. I file a Freedom of Information Act against the Park Service. This is in their jurisdiction, their search. They say they don't have any reports.
So you said the first one was found a week later?
Yep.
And in the same place then the other person was found?
No, different place.
Okay, but in that area?
And
Yeah.
what shape are the bodies?
I wish I knew. Next. So, part of the documents I received said that they don't have any reports, but I also requested photos. And they said both these people were not married. They were life partners together. Both died. And I said, and I know how to write this now. And I said, so they're deceased. They don't have a spouse that's alive. So because of that, I want the photos, and you can't deny my request because it's a spousal concern. They wrote back and said, we're denying your request for photos because we don't want to expose the family to embarrassment. There's no such rule in the Freedom of Information Act. But that's what it says in the letter to me. Next.
Question about the FOIA. You've written to obviously many different groups and or people in your work on this. Do you feel that it's largely subjective as to the individual handling the case?
I think almost there's some uniform policy approach on it. I don't think it's subjective. I think they've got a policy. I don't think they're afraid about lying about it. Because according to the Freedom of Information Act request, the way the law is written, there's no negative consequence to lying. So they deny it and they have the reports. You can't be prosecuted for it. So I've got to hurry to get through this. Really hurry. MUFON, I've been a MUFON investigator for 15 years now. So I see a lot of things, the MUFON's Mutual UFO Network, I see a lot of things and I say, wow, that relates to this possibly. What happened is that the Cape Fear River, Southern Carolina, I can't remember now. Anyhow, the Cape Fear, this person wrote about an alien encounter that they had along the river and they named the location. And I said, whoa, next. That corresponds to two people I've written about. This is within miles that they disappeared from inside of homes. One case, a boy is staying with his aunt in a home with their dog, who's sleeping next to the boy on the floor in the family room. The aunt says, I'm going to turn the alarm on, so if he leaves, I'll hear the alarm will go off. She goes to sleep. She wakes up. The dog and the boy are gone. Alarm didn't go off. And huge search, never found. Subsequent to that, another case under almost identical circumstances, boy disappears within 2 miles, never found. Next. 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 These are all the cases I've written about that are inside a home under almost identical circumstances. What you're going to find is that police and search and rescue people, when they can't find an answer to something, they will immediately go, oh, it's a criminal case. It's abduction. They will use the word abduction. That's their answer to everything. Next. These are cases where people have disappeared within a vehicle, young people. One incident in there I write about, the parents couldn't understand how their kid got out because there was no door handles inside. Next. I get letters every week from people about different things, and this one guy from Finland wrote to me, did a great job. He said, do you know that you have 4 cases of missing people that you've written about that have occurred at the same time that a craft has disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle? Next. I've written about 5 cases where there's been aircraft that have crashed in conjunction with the search. Strange. Next. Profile points. Areas previously searched, I have 125 of those. Weather anomalies associated with the search. People are somewhat disabled. Scholars. There's a claim that the people were abducted by law enforcement. Many of the people were athletes and scholars, found in boulder fields. Next. 58 clusters in North America. Mountains and water play a predominant role. They're in areas that previously were vacant. Major clusters, Yosemite in northern Colorado, the Great Lakes, the Appalachian Trail, and Pacific Coast. Next. Talked about Dale Stelling in Mesa Verde National Park. Next. We'll skip that. Next. Talked about the Von Gortlers. Next. Maurice Domitz, he was a Denver University graduate. He was a minister. And every month he would go out with his best friend and they would look for precious stones in an area near the Devil's Lookout in Pike National Forest. He was extremely disabled with bad hips and could barely get around. His friend would help him into a location and he would sit there for hours and just look for rocks. And then his friend would help him back to the car. What happened was that his friend helped him into a position, came back 20 minutes later, he's not there. All of his tools are gone, everything's gone, never found. Next. Teresa Schmidt, about 7 air miles from where Domitz disappeared, is this Lost Valley guest ranch. Her husband was a physician, and they're there for a physician's conference. She says, hey, I'm just going to go take a walk over the hill on a hike. She disappears. They found her water bottle near this rocky outcropping. They never found her. She's never been found. There's really, we've been to that area. There's no place to disappear to because there's not a lot of trees. Next. Vanek disappeared on the side of Mount Holy Cross of 14er. That's what the mountain looks like. There's no place to hide. Never found. Next. 3-Boy Triangle we talked about. Next. That is the triangle. It's about 20-25 miles on the longest ends of those triangle. Inside that purple zone, that's Rocky Mountain National Park. Next. That's Beal Arch who disappeared in the park. He was right behind his dad on a trail next to a creek. They thought he was in the creek. They dammed the creek, emptied the creek. He wasn't in the creek. Witnesses later on. Next. That's him in the picture in the white shorts. Next. This is what the search looked like. Next. Hundreds and hundreds of people came from Denver. Next. This is where they dammed the river. Next. That's part of the search party. Next. That's what the river looked like next, or creek. That's how they dammed it next. Get this story. Little boy disappears. 2 people are camping way back in the Rocky Mountains. They don't even know anyone's disappeared. They're hiking down this valley, and they stop to take a rest, and they thought they hear something like a couple hundred feet above them. They look, and here's this little boy looking down over this rock at them. They get out their binoculars, and they both look, a husband and wife. They can't believe that a parent would allow their child to even do this. They think it's bizarre. They come down into the valley. Here's 1,200 people, searchers everywhere. They go, wow. They heard a little boy's missing, but they don't know. They get back to Denver the next day, and on the front page is Beale Arch's picture, and they go, oh my God, that's the boy we saw. They drive back to the park. Park Service separates them, thinks that they're in charge. They might have abducted the boy. That's what they think originally. Then they say, we saw this boy up in this area, and they said, where on a map? They point to it, Devil's Nest. They send a climbing crew that takes a day to get in there. That's how rugged it is. They never find the boy. Next. That's what Devil's Nest looks like up off, that's it way up there. Next. That's what it looks like up close. It's horrendously difficult. Rocky area, again, no place to hide. Next. Vigil is part of that 3-boy triangle. Next. That's where Vigil disappeared. Next. Atadero we talked about. Next. This is the area where he found his remains. Next. Next. Rocky area, boulder strewn. Next. Next. That's his shirt that was found. Mountain lion experts said that the back side of the shirt, this area would have been torn because that's where the mountain lion would have grabbed him. And then it would have torn out this area of his shirt to get at the gut area. Next. Again, relatively intact. Next. That's the area that his shoes were found in, strewn amongst these boulders right here. What's unusual is that his shoes went through 4 winters, spring, summer, fall in Colorado, and they look brand new. I've seen them. Next. That's what the shoe looks like. His pants were found inside out. That's the key to me. How do the pants get inside out? Next. That's his skull cavity. Next. Stop for a second here. It's hard to see, but there's striation marks in the skull. We sent this to one of the most seasoned forensic examiners who's seen 5,000 of these skulls that have been found in the wild. 5,000 cases. He's never seen that. He says, I don't know the animal that can do that because those are such finite marks. It's almost like a razor or a knife did that. Next. What this is that's the only tooth they ever found on the top of a log. 4 winters in Colorado, and that tooth's on top of a log. Hard to believe. Next.
I mean, it's just laying there.
Just like that. All these locations are where people were found. See any consistency there?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Next. Another spoke in the wheel. This is my last book, Young Men Found in Water. Most of the time, they can't find a cause of death. No scent trail, no witnesses. Loss of phone contact. I write about a lot of times the people are on the phone. They say, oh my God, or where are you? Phone goes dead. They're found in a river or a lake days, weeks later. Missing clothing on a vast majority of time. Next. This is the keystone case to me. Jelani Brinson, 24 years old, athlete, Division II soccer star, was All-American. He went missing on April 17th at 10:30 p.m., a friend's home. They were having a little get-together after work in Anoka, Minnesota. It's a cluster zone of missing people. He's found 1,500 feet from that residence in a golf course pond. Next. This is where he was found. No cause of death. He didn't drown. He had no shoes on. Somebody in law enforcement was paying attention and made note of this. Because when they pulled the body out, they said that the socks were absolutely clean. Meaning, he didn't walk across a muddy golf course to get into that pond. Someone, quote, someone placed Jelani in the pond. It's the most frustrating case in my career. And that was what the head police detective said about this case. Somebody placed him in the pond. His articles of clothing were strewn across various areas between the house and where he was found. Why can't they find a cause of death? That's consistent. How did he get in the pond? How did he die? Next. The water deaths predominantly Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Boston, New York, Michigan, Indiana, and Ontario. When the body is taken out and given the autopsy, the coroner state, well, this is unusual. Person disappeared 2 weeks ago Monday. We find him today in the water, but his body doesn't show the signs of being in water that entire time. Now, your body goes through certain points of decomposition and change based on the temperature of the water, the temperature outside, the location you were found in, and your body will go through those if it's in that location a specific period of time. Now, in these instances, smart medical examiners in many of these things have stated, no, person disappeared. They were not in that water the entire time. We don't know where they've been. Nobody knows where they've been, but they were gone the entire time, and now all of a sudden they're found in that water. Next. Safety precautions I tell every group. Tell your friends where you're going before you go on a hike. Tell them when you're going to be back. Items to carry. Carry a whistle. I carry a personal satellite locator beacon. You can look on them on Amazon, $150 to $300. If you get lost, you sit down, you pull, sends a message up to a satellite, stay there. Within 8 hours, a rescue team will be there within 10 yards. I also carry a satellite phone. Food and water, take extra food and water, carry a map. I also carry a firearm every place I go. I don't tell people to do that, but if you're comfortable, I have never heard of somebody that disappeared under these circumstances carrying a firearm and a personal locator transponder. Lots of hunters I've written about who have disappeared. Lots of people who, only one person I know who has ever disappeared fitting this profile just outside Yosemite that was carrying a locator transponder. And he was found in the most unusual place I can ever describe. Emergency collapsible blanket, they're about that big. They cost you like $3 or $4. Carry one of those. Next. There's my 5 books. Don't buy them on Amazon. Amazon has them listed right now between $125 and $200. You can buy them on my website for $25 a piece. I have them downstairs right now. So, I'm going to get kicked out. I'm sorry. I tried to rush through it.